Stay tuned. Ahead I'll talk with Eden Robbins about her novel, Remember You Will Die. This novel is a fascinating genre-bending tale that spans continents, centuries, and planets, and is told mostly through obituaries. Oh, and it's also the story of an AI mother dealing with the death of her human daughter. Hi, I'm Dan Skinner, and this is Some Books Considered. Eden Robbins' previous novel, When Franny Stands Up, received multiple awards, including being named a Best Book of 2022 by the Chicago Reader. Her short stories, personal essays, and cultural criticism have appeared in Slate, LA Review of Books, and USA Today, among others. She joins us to talk about her novel, Remember You Will Die. Eden, welcome to Some Books Considered.
Oh my gosh, Dan, thank you for having me.
Now, this book has been described as genre-bending, and from what I've read of the book, I believe that's an accurate description because it traverses time and space and planets. And how would you describe this book for someone who's interested in picking it up?
Yeah, it is a story told through linked obituaries and some found articles, some etymologies. The story kind of unfolds through these objects as opposed to a traditional narrative. But I do think it has elements of a bunch of different genres. It's a little sci-fi, it's a little fantasy, but at the heart of it, it's the story of a mother and a daughter.
But in this case, the mother is an AI, so that adds a certain wrinkle to the story.
Yes, it is. It's an unusual relationship, but it is a story of a mother's grief. But I felt that grief is sort of for something that is so common that we all are going to go through in one way or another. It feels inhuman. It feels like we're not ourselves when we're grieving. And so I wondered what that would feel like if a person who was grieving was not actually a person, and how they would try to reconcile those feelings, and how they would find solace when they were going through terrible grief.
Well, I understand that is part of the inspiration for this book, dealing with your grief and dealing with going through this pandemic, et cetera. Tell us a little bit about that inspiration.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had quit my full-time job in March of 2020, just coincidentally, to write another book. And I found myself immediately unable to write. And I didn't know how. I tried all of my tricks. I tried to write by hand. I tried to read a bunch of books, and nothing was working. And so I just followed the advice of cartoonist Linda Berry, who was, when she had writer's block, took out some yellow legal pads, and some paint, and just started to paint her rough draft by hand. And I thought, well, that's a good enough thing to try as any. And so I sat, and for several months, I filled 6 legal pads with paint. And it was so slow that I couldn't think. I couldn't worry. I couldn't be sad. I couldn't be scared about the pandemic, about anything that was happening. I was just focused on what's it like to paint an E? And it felt really good. And I think I slowed my brain down enough that I was able to relax and come up with new ideas. And it literally just popped into my head one day, what if I wrote a book of obituaries? And I thought, no, I can't do that. Can I do that? Has anyone done that before? And I just decided to give it a try. And it was a very helpful way to feel this grief. At the same time, my mother-in-law was not doing well. She was in a nursing home. There was a lot going on. And I just set myself an activity to every day sit down and write one short obituary on whatever I felt like. And I just figured I would put it together someday. I would figure out how it all fit together someday. And it was very cathartic and a very great way to go through the pandemic and sort of process what was happening.
I want to talk to you a little bit more about that process in a bit, but let's talk about the story here. And it centers around this AI who is grieving from the loss of her human daughter. And but because it's an AI, like you said, it's not human. It has to try to process this differently. And so we see the name of the daughter, Poppy, and then how there's almost like a little desperateness in this AI as it starts searching for connections to poppy. You get the etymology of the word poppy, different poppies throughout history, etc. Tell us a bit more about the plot that people are going to find here.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of a mystery in here. I hesitate to call it a mystery because I know mystery readers are always looking for something very particular in a mystery. So it's not a mystery, but there are mystery elements. And the story, it basically starts with the disappearance of a mysterious young girl. They don't know her name. She supposedly drowns in the East River in Manhattan. That is the first obituary, but that's really kind of a news article. And then it sets off a search, and you don't know who's searching or why, but somebody is searching for Poppy. And then it turns out that this person who drowned, her name was Poppy, and she was the daughter of an AI. And at this point, the reader is like, wait, I'm sorry, what's happening? Who is this girl? Who is this AI? And the story opens up from there. About the people that Poppy knew, who this AI was, how she was made, how she was able to have a child in the first place. She basically was part of an AI collective that disappeared from the earth because they were so fed up with humanity. And she was the only one left because she was the only one left in a human body. And she liked being on Earth. She liked being in a body. But that came with its own troubles because she was always mistrusted and hunted and all of this stuff. So the AI's one real connection to the planet was her daughter, and her daughter disappeared, is dead. And so she spends the entire book looking for Poppy and trying to figure out what happened to her. And by the end, it all comes together.
Well, what I kind of enjoyed about this is I imagine this AI and its ability to think very quickly. And that's why, and it was pulling in all these tangents of, like I said, what does Poppy mean? How does Poppy show up here? What does Poppy what? But, because it's dealing with the stress and not knowing how to deal with this loss. So it's kind of just pulling at everything. And I think there's something very human about that too, when we're faced with something that is overwhelming or don't understand. We're looking for answers everywhere.
Yes, looking for connections, any connection, whether or not it is a good connection or a correct connection. Humans are very good at finding patterns and connections and things, whether or not they exist. And I did want to structure the book as sort of, when you look something up on Wikipedia or something, and then you click on a link and you learn something else, and then you end up in this internet rabbit hole. I figured that was kind of probably how an AI brain would work, is just searching for one thing after another, and it ends up being this sort of like network of people and information that eventually comes to create a whole.
So dealing with grief is one of the themes here. What are some of the other themes that this book explores?
Yeah, I mean, a lot. It explores art and art making, the idea of legacy. One of the things that was really important to me, or that I was thinking about a lot, was you just never know how you'll be remembered or if you'll be remembered. And the things that we set out to be remembered for, we have no control over that. And so if you set out to do good or do something amazing, in 3 generations, you're going to be forgotten anyway. And so I don't know, I find that liberating, because instead of going through your life being like, oh, here's what I should be doing because this is the good thing and it's going to have this effect, you have no idea. So you can only make the best decision in the moment. And go from there. We only have this one moment at a time versus looking at our whole lives as a whole.
I'm talking with Eden Robbins about Remember You Will Die, and our conversation continues in a moment. If you're enjoying this discussion, please subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you know when I post new interviews. And thank you. Because of all these themes in here, besides being an engaging story, are there takeaways for readers or things you want people to think about after they've read this book?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we have a really unhealthy relationship to death. And I think that our unhealthy relationship to death leads to a lot of anxious behavior and sometimes bad behavior, and it all comes from this fear of not knowing, of being uncertain about life and uncertain about death. And I think that part of that is just ignoring that death is a reality that is coming for all of us, that you can't avoid it. You can't avoid grief. And so just know that whatever happens, you're going to be able to deal with it, and you can kind of relax into that idea. And if you can relax into that idea, I think a lot of things become a lot easier. And I know there's a lot of themes in this book that sort of revolve around all different stuff, but for me, that's the core of it. Like, just relax into the fact that we're all doing the best we can. It's best to be gentle with each other. And you can't, it doesn't matter what you do, doesn't matter how much money you have or whatever you do or how you live your life, you are eventually going to die. And that's okay. And there's nothing you can do about it. So just relax.
I wanted to ask you a little bit more about process, because this is a complicated book. And some authors will outline everything ahead of time. Others will just kind of, I've heard it described different ways. Somebody told me I write with a compass. I know where I'm going, but I figure it out along the way. And some referred to as being a pantser, that you're flying by the seat of your pants. So how did you approach putting this all together? And because at times it feels almost like stream of consciousness, but it's not, because you kind of go in a lot of different ways, but it all ties together. So it seems like that'd be a big challenge as an author.
Yeah, it was a huge challenge. It was, what's interesting is that the obituaries that are in here, there were not a lot of other ones that I cut. Um, these are mostly the ones that I started off with, which is really unusual for me. I tend to write many, many drafts of books, but this one, it was kind of the content stayed more or less the same. What was really difficult was putting it all together. And I went through various methods. I am sort of usually a pantser, meaning I don't plan in advance, and I definitely didn't plan this. I just wrote one at a time. Sometimes they felt like stream of consciousness. Sometimes it felt like just picking up the same story at a different point of the story. So, I did the paint writing at the beginning where I filled the legal pads with paint. I wrote one obituary a day until I had enough that was draft length. Then I would take those and put them on note cards and shuffle them around and then rewrite the draft that way. At one point, I bought an electric typewriter off of eBay. Kurt Vonnegut's, not his actual typewriter, but the same brand as his typewriter. And I retyped the entire draft on paper, scanned it, and then edited that. Ultimately, I had a lot of help from my husband. We took my Scrivener file, put it on the TV screen, like screencast it, and then went through every single obituary to figure out what the connections between them were, what the best order was. And then at that point, a lot of the writing I was doing was just finishing the endings of one and the beginnings of the next so that they fit together. And so there was a lot of like really surgical story stuff happening. I made a timeline on newsprint. I made a family tree. There were these massive documents just trying to visualize, who was alive, when, and what they were doing. At one point, I realized a brother and sister had lived a century apart. And I was like, oh, well, that's not possible. I got to change the dates on these. So there was a lot of like logistical wrangling in addition to the editing and the reordering. So it was a very complicated process that took a very long time.
I'm wondering also about the research for this, because you span time, so the use of language changes over time, et cetera. So what kind of research challenges did this pose for you?
So I love to research, and I love to research in tidbits. I'm a bit of a dilettante that way. I like to, just sort of dip in and dip back out. So this was great for me. I got to do exactly what I wanted to do. I would spend a day being like, what is the etymology of this, and where does it come from, and what does it mean to us, or like how are computers built, and what are their limitations? and how can I make this an actually fun and interesting thing to talk about rather than not feel like a technical brochure. So that's the kind of challenge I really like. So it didn't feel arduous to me. I think once I was doing the editing and going through and making sure everything was accurate, yeah, I would go online and be like, did people use this word in 1859? Would this periodical have existed at this time? That's what copy editors are great for too. So the things that I missed, they would pick up and be like, yeah, you need to change the name of this. This didn't exist at the time. They must have hated me. I mean, it must have taken forever to copy edit this book. But for me, it was a very enjoyable exercise to research tidbits of a thing and then the next day do something completely different.
Eden, there's a question that I like to ask authors of fiction, and it's this. If you could spend a day in real life with one of the characters from your novel, who would it be and why?
Yeah, the first one that comes to mind is a character named Louise Flechette, and she was a film director. In the book, I made this up. Sometimes people think that these are real obituaries, and so I have to be like, this was fictional. Louise Flechette was a film director in the 1920s, and in the book, she directed this massive epic production of a silent film called The Courageous Virgin Wilgefortis, who was an actual mythological character based on a statue of Jesus that this small town thought was a bearded woman. And so they renamed her Wilgefortis. Anyway, so the story is this story of Wilgefortis, and it's a very tumultuous filming, and the movie is a bomb. And then Louise Flechette kind of disappears, and then she comes back many years later in the 70s and gets to make some, gritty 70s movies, and then kind of disappears again and comes back. And I really like her because she's so tenacious and just she fails and picks herself up and fails again and picks herself up and is just is like, well, this is what I do, and I will do whatever it takes to be able to do it some more. I think she would be really fun to hang out with, maybe a little crotchety though.
So congratulations on this book being out there.
Thank you.
You have gotten your inspiration for your next book?
I'm still thinking about it. I have a couple small ideas after doing such an epic story. I'm thinking about doing a novel that takes place over just 24 hours, and wondering how I might pull that off. I really like to do something completely different from book to book. I also wrote an actual murder mystery with a friend of mine that we're hoping to finish very soon. So that'll be another completely different thing.
The novel is Remember You Will Die by Eden Robbins. Eden, thank you for talking with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun.
Now, if you'd like to purchase Remember You Will Die, I've placed a link for you in the description below. If you enjoyed this discussion, please take a moment to subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you know when I post new interviews. Meanwhile, here are 2 more interviews you might find interesting. I'm Dan Skinner. Thank you for watching this edition of Some Books Considered.